How was your day? Maybe you carried something today that you weren't supposed to feel. A thing you'd never say out loud, kept quiet behind a steady face. There's a knight in the old Celtic stories who carried something like that for years. The greatest sword in the kingdom, and a heart no one was allowed to know about. His name was Lancelot. If today felt heavy in a way you couldn't quite name, settle in. Let the candles go low. We're going to a stone hall lit by firelight, and to a moment that already happened. A castle is burning. Smoke rises straight into the night sky. Lancelot is on horseback, longsword still drawn. And the queen of the kingdom is on the saddle behind him. The kingdom is called Camelot. The king is his closest friend. And Lancelot, the greatest knight the world will ever name, is riding away from the man he loves most. How does a man like that arrive at a moment like this? The greatest knight in the world, riding against his own king. There is a woman in this story. There is also love. There is something else too. The kind of love that comes once and asks for everything, and then asks more. The kind that does not care what it costs the world around it. Maybe you know that feeling. The thing you can't say out loud. The choice that wasn't really a choice. Only what you would have done anyway. Every time, knowing better. This is what we do here, one story a week, one night. Something that happened a long time ago. And still has something to say to anyone who's ever loved the wrong thing well. Get comfortable. Adjust your pillow, find your warmth. If you drift off before the end. The old knights have stood watch over sleeping mortals for 1,000 years. They don't mind. This is only the beginning. The part most people never reach. The cost, the choice, the ending. That is still ahead. But not tonight. Tonight, just this. If tonight felt like something, subscribe. We'll be here next week. Another story, another quiet hour like this. Now back to ours. To begin, we have to go back, long before the burning castle. Long before the queen. To a small boy at the edge of a still green lake. The lake that took him in. His mother had run from a burning hall herself, and laid him at the water's edge. Then a hand of pale silver light reached up out of the lake, and took him. Beneath that lake, there was a hall. There was a lady whose hair was like white moonlight on water. She raised the boy as her own, and she gave him a name. Lancelot. It means little besides this, the boy who came up out of the water. The boy who would, one day, walk up out of it again, and into a kingdom called Camelot. Camelot, in those years, was the brightest thing the world had ever made. A king had pulled a sword from a stone. A round table had been built. No head, no foot, no rank. Knights came from every corner of the world to sit there, to swear, to serve. And on a clear, bright morning in early summer, one more rode up to its gate. He came alone. He gave his name at the gate, Lancelot of the Lake. The guards looked at one another. They had heard that name before, but never on the lips of a man who carried it. They sent a runner, up the long flight of stone steps, through 3 sets of doors, into a hall where a king sat at the head of a round table that had no head. The king was Arthur. Golden-haired, broken-nosed from old battles, kind in the way only a man who had seen real cruelty can be. He looked up. He smiled. Bring him in. A door at the far end opened. A man walked into the long shaft of colored window light. Tall, steady. The chainmail clean, the cloak plain. The eyes very level. The hall went quiet on its own. He went to one knee. He laid his sword across his open palms, pommel toward the king. If you will have me, I serve. I leave the way I came. Arthur stood up. Arthur came down the steps himself. He did not take the sword. He took the man's shoulder. He pulled him up. Then sit, he said. There is a chair. There has always been a chair. Have you ever felt that? Being met, exactly as you came, by someone who didn't ask for less and didn't demand more. It happens rarely in a life. Lancelot had not felt it before. A tournament was called for the next morning, as was custom for any knight who took a chair. The other knights of the Round Table gathered at the lists. Word had moved fast through the kingdom. 12 men rode against him that day, 12 of the best the kingdom had. He unhorsed the first 6 in single passes. The 7th broke a lance against him. He did not move in the saddle. By the 8th, the crowd had gone quiet. Not silent the way fear is silent. Silent the way you go quiet. When you understand you are watching something, you will tell your grandchildren about. He took the 12th pass before anyone had started counting properly. The hush stretched a beat longer. Then a single child clapped, somewhere up in the stands, and the field broke into noise. Arthur rose from his royal chair and laughed. The kind of laughter that has tears just behind it. He walked down to the field himself. He embraced the still, mounted knight without taking the helm. That night they ate at the high table together. They drank from the same cup. By the time the candles burned low, the king had 3 brothers. One by blood, one by choice, and one by lake. Camelot was already a famous court. After that day it became something else. People said, "There is a place in the world where the strongest man is the kindest, where the king laughs first." A woman of red gold hair came that summer to visit. She was the king's wife. Her name was Guinevere. She had been queen 6 years already. Lancelot had never seen her. He saw her now. He had ridden against 12 knights and not moved in the saddle. He stood now in a quiet hall, perfectly still, while a woman walked down a flight of stone steps. Something in him had stopped. She reached the floor. Arthur was already crossing toward her, smiling. He took her hand. He turned with her to the room. "This," he said, "is Lancelot. I have been telling you about him." She inclined her head the way queens do. He bowed the way knights do. 2 practiced gestures between strangers. Beneath them, 2 practiced gestures between people who had just become a problem. Maybe you have done that too. Performed the ordinary face for the ordinary moment, while something underneath you tilted slightly and never quite tilted back. Nobody around you noticed. Neither of them moved. That evening Lancelot sat in his new chair at the round table and answered every question politely. He did not look toward the high table. He did not need to. He already knew where she sat. Days became weeks, weeks became a season. Lancelot rode out on small quests as the king's champion, and came home each time covered in dust and other people's blood, never his own. Stay with this. The slow part is the part that matters. The thing that breaks a kingdom does not begin with a battle. It begins with a man and a woman who are very careful around each other. The court never saw them speak alone. Not at the high table, not at the tournaments, not in the chapel for the morning prayer. They were polite. The way people are when they have a great deal to lose. There is a kind of careful that is, in itself, a confession. Both of them were practicing it. Neither of them was certain the other was, so they kept practicing months past. Then there was a small matter of state. A neighboring lord wanted to speak with the queen on a question of land. Arthur was in the south. Tradition required a witness of high rank. The steward looked at his list. The list said the king's champion, in the king's absence. The steward sighed and walked the long corridor. He knocked at a heavy oak door. It opened. An hour later the lord from the north was pleading his case to the queen. Lancelot stood 3 paces behind her chair, hands clasped, eyes on the far wall, both very practiced, both very still. When the lord left and the door closed, neither of them moved for a long second. Then she said, without turning, "Walk with me to the garden, Sir Lancelot. The roses have just started." His feet obeyed before he did. The queen's garden was small. It was walled in pale stone draped with white roses and ivy. There was a fountain. There was an apple tree at the corner. There was no one else in it. They walked the path the way 2 people walk when both of them have rehearsed not walking it. She stopped at the fountain. She did not turn. She said, "I think you know." 3 words, said into water. He could have answered 3 different ways. He could have asked what she meant. He could have lied. He said, "I do," and it was already done. Neither of them touched the other. Not that day. They walked the path again twice. They spoke about the roses. They went their separate ways from the gate. The garden was now another country. He went out the next morning on a small quest. A woman from a far village had come to court asking for help with a thing in the woods. He took it. He needed the road. The thing in the woods turned out to be a brigand. He freed 2 children, set the man down without killing him, returned the children to their mother, 3 days then back. The road did not help. He thought about her in the rain. He thought about her in the silence between the trees. He thought about her at the fire. He thought about her in the cold. He came back to Camelot in 5 days, which was 2 days longer than the matter required. Arthur greeted him at the inner courtyard with both arms. Guinevere was not there to greet him at all. Months passed like that. He rode out, he rode back. She was sometimes at the high table, sometimes in her rooms. The court began calling him the king's right hand. They were not wrong. Then one autumn night a cup was knocked over at supper. A small thing, wine on a white sleeve. He reached without thinking. So did she. Their hands met for the first time on a tablecloth. It was nothing. They both pulled back. A page came running with a fresh cloth. Arthur laughed. The supper went on, but on her sleeve, a small dark stain remained for the rest of the evening. She wore that gown to bed that night. She did not wash it. She did not give it to a maid. The next morning she folded it carefully and laid it in a chest. The stain stayed. Camelot at this point had everything. A round table, a great king, a great knight, a queen of red gold hair, a peace that had lasted longer than any peace before, and one quiet stain. We pause here. We are going to step back from the story for a few minutes to find out where it actually came from, because the version we just began telling, it did not always look like this. The oldest stories of King Arthur are Welsh. They come from a place where long winter nights were filled with poets at fires. In those first stories, Lancelot was not there at all. He arrived later, centuries later. A French poet named Crétin de Troyes wrote him into the court for a queen who was reading those Welsh stories and wanted something new in them. She wanted love. So a Welsh hero, king, was given a French knight, and that knight was given a forbidden heart. And the story of a kingdom became, slowly, also a story of 2 people in a walled garden. That is the version we are telling tonight. The shape that the story took once it passed through warm rooms and quiet poets and queens who wanted to read about the cost of love. Now back to Camelot, back to the autumn after the stained sleeve, back to a kingdom where a king and his greatest knight and a queen with red, gold hair were still all very careful around one another. Lancelot built himself a habit. Every 5th or 6th night, when sleep would not come, he would walk the outer wall alone. The guards knew not to greet him. He always took the same path. The path took him past a small narrow window in a side tower. From the wall, you could see directly into a corner of the queen's garden. He would slow his step there. He never stopped. He never looked. One such night, he heard the gate of that garden, very faint, click open. He did not turn. He kept walking. But on the next pass, an hour later, he saw a single small light moving below. He stopped that time. He stood at the wall for a long minute. Then he went very quietly down the narrow inner stair, and through the corridors he was not supposed to know, to the gate of the garden. She was at the fountain, the lantern at her feet. She did not turn when she heard the gate click. She said, "Into the water. I did not think you would come." He said, "I came every 5th night." "You weren't here." She said, "I came tonight." "You came tonight?" Neither of them moved. The fountain kept making its small quiet sound between them. She turned slowly. He saw her face for the first time without the gold circlet, without the careful queen's mouth. Just a woman in a garden at night. He took one step, just one, and stopped. He said, "I do not want to take anything from him." She said, "Neither do I." There was a long silence. The lantern flame leaned with a small autumn breeze. Then it leaned the other way. She stepped to him. He did not step away. They did not embrace. She put her hand against the side of his face, just under the scar on his cheek. She left it there. He closed his eyes. Maybe you have known a moment like that. The one that does not undo any of the rules of your life. The one that simply happens anyway, and afterward the rules feel a little smaller than they did. She lowered her hand. She picked up the lantern. She walked back along the gravel path without another word. The gate clicked softly behind her. He stood at the fountain for a long time after. Nothing changed and everything had. They went on in public, more careful than ever. He rode out on more quests. She held the queen's place at the high table. Arthur, kind Arthur, suspected nothing. Once a year, twice, 3 times, they would find a quiet hour. The small walled garden, a long corridor at deep night, a chapel after the last bell. They never spoke of it during the day. They told themselves it was small. A few stolen hours in a year. They were good people, doing one wrong thing very carefully. That is the lie every careful love tells. It is never small for long. Stay here for a moment. The thing about a love like this is not the few hours you spend together. It is the 1,000 other hours you spend not letting your face show anything. That is what costs. Years passed like that. 5, then 7. Camelot grew brighter every season. The Knights of the Round Table became famous in songs sung in countries that had never seen the castle. Lancelot's name in particular went ahead of him. There was a town on the southern coast where mothers told their children, "If you are good, the man in blue may come this way someday." He never knew that. He killed dragons in the way that the old stories use the word. Large, dangerous things that lived in places people couldn't go. He freed villages. He returned stolen children. He never asked for payment. When he came back, the king embraced him. The queen offered her hand for him to bow over. The court cheered. He smiled. None of the 3 movements was a lie. None of them was the whole truth either. Across the hall, sometimes, a thin man in plain black would watch. Quiet, eyes a little too patient. His name was Mordred, Arthur's nephew. We will come to him later. Remember him. Mordred had grown up in the cold parts of the family. He had heard, all his life, that he was lucky to be at this court at all. He smiled at the right moments. He never laughed. He listened more than he spoke. He noticed who looked where, and how long, and whether anyone else had seen. He noticed the queen's face when Lancelot rode in. He noticed the king's face when she did. He did not act. Not yet. He had no proof, and in this kingdom, accusation without proof would have him whipped from the gates. So he waited. The patient waiting of a man who has time. Meanwhile, Arthur, the kind king, the laughing king, was not blind. He had a sense, the way good men sometimes do, that something near his heart was not quite straight. He chose not to look at it. He was a king of a fragile kingdom. He had built his peace on trust. To pull at one of those threads was to pull at all of them. So he loved his wife. He loved his friend. He kept his eyes level. If you have ever loved 2 people who were quietly hurting each other, you understand Arthur in this stretch. The smile is real. The hand on the shoulder is real. The not looking is real too. Years more then. 8, 9. The kingdom did not crack. It did the harder thing, it went on. It almost made it. The thing that finally broke it would not come from any of these 3. It would come in the end, from a single white cup of light that nobody had asked for, that nobody could refuse. It would come from heaven. It would come for all of them. We are getting close now. But not yet tonight. Tonight ends here, with a kingdom still whole, with a knight who has loved well and badly, with a queen who has loved both wisely and not, with a king who is still smiling. The candles in your room can stay low. We will leave Camelot like this for a moment, with the late light still on its walls. Tomorrow, in the story, that strange light comes into the hall. It came at midday. The hall was full. The king was speaking. He stopped speaking. The light came down through the high stained glass window, pale gold and silver, white, thicker than any sun. Inside the column, very faint, very still, was the shape of a cup. None of them had seen it before. All of them recognized it, the Holy Grail, visible for one breath, then gone. For a long second nobody spoke. Then a young knight named Gawain put his hand on the table and said, "I will not sleep under a roof until I see it again." 12 more rows, then 20, then 30. Lancelot stood too. He was the king's champion. There was no question whether he would go. The question was something else. What it would do to him. He had not had time to think about it yet. Arthur sat down again slowly. He looked very tired for a moment, in the way kings sometimes do. Then he stood up properly. He said, "Then go. Every one of you, the kingdom will hold." He turned to Lancelot last. He did not say go. He did not say stay. He said, "Whatever you find, come back. The chair will be here." Lancelot bowed. The hall began to empty. They left at dawn the next morning. Each knight rode out a different gate. Each took a different road. The Grail, in the old understanding, was something that would not be found by company, only alone. She was at her tall, narrow window when he rode out. She did not lift the curtain. She did not lean down. She stood 3 paces back from the glass, so that no one could see her standing there. He did not look up. He rode for 3 days through ordinary country. Villages, fields, ferries across small rivers. He spoke to children. He paid for his own meals. The road did not feel like a road of the Grail. Then it did. On the 4th morning the road turned into a forest he had not entered before. The trees were older. The sound was thinner. The air had a faint silver in it. He understood, without being told, that he had crossed a line. That afternoon he came on a small hut with a thin trail of blue smoke. An old woman in a gray shawl was tending a fire outside. She did not look surprised to see him. She said, "There is bread. Sit." They ate bread. They drank water from a small cracked clay cup. She asked him only one question. She said, "Tell me what you are looking for." In one word. He thought. He said, "Forgiveness." She nodded once. She did not say more. She gave him a place to sleep, a pile of soft sheepskins by the fire. He slept easily for the first time in a year. In the morning, the hut was gone. He was alone in the leaves. He rode for many days more. The forest opened, closed, opened again. He met a knight in red who challenged him at a bridge. He unhorsed him without anger and rode on. The forest accepted that. He met a child crying alone in a clearing, a little boy who said his mother was lost. He took the boy up onto the saddle. He found the mother by sundown. He did not stay for the thanks. He met an old monk on a bare hillside who fed him bread and asked him whether he confessed regularly. He said he did. The monk looked at him a long time. He said, "Confess again before you go, properly." Lancelot looked into the fire for a long time. He had confessed regularly. He had confessed everything that was not the one thing. The monk waited. He did not press. The wind on the hill was low and even. He did not confess that night. He could not yet. The monk did not seem disappointed. He only nodded, blessed him, and went to sleep on the hillside under his cloak. Lancelot rode on at first light. For weeks the road went on like that. Small kindnesses, small fights, small refusals. He helped where help was wanted. He killed where killing was unavoidable. None of it brought him any closer to the cup. He began to understand something he did not want to understand. The cup was not hidden from him because he was lost. It was hidden from him because of one specific room, in one specific castle, with one specific person. He kept riding. What else was there? To turn around now and go back to that room felt like its own betrayal of the king who had sent him out. The road stretched. The forest closed back in. One afternoon, the road brought him out at the foot of a tall white stone castle on a low hill. There were no banners. There was a long pale stone bridge across a narrow green moat. The gate was already open. He led the warhorse across. No challenge came. The inner courtyard was clean and silent. A single old serving man in a plain blue tunic met him without surprise. He said only, "The Lord is waiting. Come." He was led through silent corridors to a long stone hall. At the far end stood a tall, thin lord in a dark crimson robe, with a long pale beard and the same faintly tired, luminous look about the eyes. The lord bowed low. The lord said, You are Lancelot of the Lake. We have been waiting for you for a long time. This is Castle Corbenic. The thing you came for is here." Lancelot did not move. He did not answer. "The Lord see it. You may not see it. Not directly, not yet. But it is here. It has been here in this place, since before this kingdom was a name. Tonight you may see what you can see." He gestured. Lancelot followed the Lord through the doorway and down a narrow stone passage. At the end was a chapel. Old, long. 12 white candles along each wall already burning. A single round rose window of red and gold glass. At the far end was a plain stone altar covered in a white cloth. Behind the altar, though there was no candle there, was a faint pale blue, gold light. As if something was simply quietly burning behind it. The old lord stopped at the threshold. "He did not enter," he said, "from here alone. Walk only as far as you are permitted. Do not be ashamed of where you stop." Then he stepped back. He stepped into the chapel. He took 1 step, 2, 5. The candles on either side did not flicker. The pale blue gold light at the altar grew slightly. He kept walking. He had walked into many places before. At 10 paces from the altar, the air thickened. Not against him exactly. Just thicker, the way water is thicker than air. He kept walking. The pale light behind the altar was no longer pale. It was full. He could feel it now. At 5 paces, he could not lift his foot. Not because anything was holding him. Because something inside him knew. With a clean certainty no argument could move. That he could not bring himself any closer to that thing. He could see, very faintly, behind the altar, the outline of the cup. He could feel that if he were to come closer it would simply step away from him. It was not refusing him out of cruelty. It was protecting him. He went down on 1 knee, then both. He bowed forward until his forehead touched the cool stone of the chapel floor. He stayed there. The cup, far ahead of him, did not come closer. It also did not go away. He stayed there for a very long time. The candles burned down a finger's width along each wall. The radiance behind the altar did not move. He understood, slowly, what the wall between him and that light was made of. It was made of a small walled garden. It was made of a single fountain. It was made of a hand under a scarred cheekbone. It was made of years of careful nights. He did not deny any of it. He did not regret any of it either. Maybe you have stood at a door like that, in a smaller way. The thing you most wanted, on the other side of a thing you also could not let go of. Both real, both yours, no clever way through. He rose eventually. He picked up his helm. He turned. He walked back down the aisle. He did not look behind him. He did not need to. The door was where the door had always been. The Lord was at the threshold. The Lord did not say, "I am sorry." He did not say, "Try again." He said, "There is a guest chamber. The bed is warm. You are tired. Sleep, Sir Lancelot. We will speak in the morning, if you wish." He was given a small clean room. There was a deep wooden bed under a thick wool blanket. A jug of water on a simple table. A single tall narrow window of clear glass. He laid his sword on the chest. He lay down. He slept. Hard. The kind of sleep that follows a weeping you did not allow yourself to feel. The kind of sleep your body insists on. When the heart has run out of ways to hold itself up. In the deeper hours of that night, the door of his chamber opened very softly. A young woman came in carrying a small lantern of warm candlelight. Her hair was pale honey blonde in 2 simple braids. She did not wake him. This is Elaine, the Lord of Corbenic's daughter. She had been told stories of the great night her whole young life. She had also been told something else. By her father, by old women, by a vision in the chapel. She had been told that, one day, this night would come to her father's chapel. And that by her, he would have a son who would see what he could not see, the pure one. The one for whom the cup would not step away. She had been told she had not chosen this. She had been told. We sit in this part of the story with the difficult truth that not all the hands moving in a love are the hands that wanted to be moving in it. In the morning Lancelot woke to a small chamber empty of any other person. a single white lily on the carved oak chest beside his helm, and the strangest sense of having dreamed something he could not quite remember. He went home from Castle Corbenic 3 days later. He did not stay to speak with the Lord again. He did not see the daughter at all. The white stone castle disappeared into mist behind him as he rode south. He did not yet know about Galahad. He did not yet know that, somewhere behind those walls, a small life had begun. He rode toward Camelot with the cool radiance of an unfindable cup still on the inside of his eyes. The other knights, in their own forests and their own small holy places, were each meeting their own version of that wall. We will not follow each of them tonight. We will pause instead to ask a small honest question. We are going to step back from the forest for a few minutes. To ask what was a knight, actually. In the world the people who first told this story lived in, why did the word matter so much? In the early medieval world, most armed men were a kind of legalized danger. They rode in packs. They took what they wanted from villages. To call yourself a knight was, originally, to admit that you were one of those. Then the church and the poets and the queens did something quietly enormous. They began to attach vows to the word. Protect the weak. Stay with your oath. Love only one, die for what is right. Most knights in real life did not keep those vows perfectly. Most of us in real life do not keep our quietest vows perfectly. The point of the word was not perfection. The point was that, now, there was a measure. That is why a story like this one, about the very best knight of all, failing one of those vows quietly for years, held the whole medieval world. It said even the best of us live with the gap. Now back to Lancelot. Back to a man riding south through autumn forests with a cool radiance on the inside of his eyes. Back to a kingdom waiting for its knights to come home. Camelot was not idle while they were gone. One by one over many weeks the knights came back. Not all of them. A few never came back. Of those who did, everyone had a smaller voice than when he had ridden out. Each one had seen his own wall. Lancelot came back near the end of autumn. He rode in alone in late afternoon under a sky of deep pale gold. The horse was thin. He was thin too. Arthur came down the steps to meet him himself. He did not ask Arthur. He never asked the returning knights anything except, "Are you here?" Each man answered as he could. Lancelot said, "I am here." Arthur held him. The court did not see his face. She was at her tall, narrow window again. She watched him cross the courtyard. She did not move from the window for a long time after he had gone inside. She did not weep. She had stopped doing that a year ago. They saw each other again that evening at supper, across the high table. They were polite. He bowed over her hand. She inclined her head. None of it pretended to be different from before. None of it was the same. That winter she did not visit him in the corridors. He did not visit her in the chapel. They did not speak alone for 9 months. The garden gate did not click open at midnight. He went there once by himself just to see. At Castle Corbenic, in a small quiet chamber, a child had been born. A boy, pale chestnut hair, sea blue eyes. The Lord of Corbenic stood at the window and gave thanks softly to no one in particular. They named the boy Galahad. From the start, those who handled him said he was a strange child. Too quiet, too good. With eyes that were sometimes turned up toward something the rest of them could not see. They did not send word to Camelot. There was no need yet. The boy would grow. The story would arrange its own next chapter when the time came. Lancelot, in his castle, had no idea he had a son. Time worked the way it does. Galahad turned 3, then 5, then 10. He was schooled in arms by the old Castellan of Corbenic. He carried wooden swords better than other boys carried real ones. His mother was sometimes well, sometimes not. The thing she had been told to do had not made her happy. She loved her son very much. She did not blame him. The older she got, the more she went to the chapel. Back at Camelot, things had quietly resumed. 8 months after Lancelot returned from the Grail, the queen knocked once on the door of his chamber at deep night. He opened it. He did not refuse her. Neither did she. The wall in the chapel had not erased the years. It had named them. They knew now exactly what they were doing. They did it anyway. There is something about a love like that, which is past asking forgiveness for. It only asks witnessing. They were more careful than ever in the daylight. In the night they were less careful. Mordred, in his small spare chamber across the keep, began to keep notes, times, doors, movements of a queen at strange hours. A year passed. Then another. The peace held. Lancelot rode out on the king's business. He came back. The kingdom prospered. The records in the small chamber grew. The dates on them got more precise. Far north at Castle Corbenic, the boy Galahad turned 15. He asked his grandfather a question, very quietly, about his father. The old lord told him the truth, all of it. The boy listened. He did not seem surprised. When the lord was finished, Galahad said only, "Then I should ride south when the time comes. He should know I am in the world. So should the king. So should the round table." The lord nodded. He had expected that. A year more then. Galahad turned 16. His mother was visibly tired now. She sent him at last on the road south with the old castellan as escort. They left Castle Corbenic at first light on a clear, bright morning. They rode south for many days. They did not hurry. The old castellan told the young Galahad small stories of his unknown father along the way. About the lake, about the round table, about the long blue cloak. The boy listened. They came to Camelot at mid-morning on a bright day in late summer. Banners were flying. The court was at peace. There was no warning of who was at the gate. The two travelers presented themselves quietly to the gate guard. A runner went up the steps. The same long flight of stone steps a younger runner had taken 16 years ago, when a different stranger had ridden up to a different version of these gates. The old story was about to mirror itself. The doors to the round table chamber opened. The young Galahad walked in. He did not need to be announced. The hall went quiet on its own, the same way it had gone quiet for his father 16 summers earlier. Arthur looked at the boy. He looked at Lancelot. He looked back at the boy. He did not need to be told. He was a king, kind, and he was not blind. He smiled at last the way a tired father smiles. He stood up. Arthur said, "What is your name, young sir?" The boy bowed deep, the way a knight bows, though he was wearing only a white tunic. He said, "Galahad, my king. My grandfather is the lord of Castle Corbenic. My mother is Elaine." He did not say, "And my father is the man in deep blue at this table." He did not need to. Arthur nodded gently. He said, "There is a chair, Galahad. There has, this whole time, been a chair." The room understood. There was, in that round table chamber, one chair that no knight had ever sat in. It was called the Siege Perilous, the dangerous seat. It had been left empty for the only knight who would, one day, be allowed to sit in it. Arthur did not point to that chair. He pointed to a more ordinary one. Galahad walked past the offered chair and stopped at the Siege Perilous instead. He did not look at his father. He laid his slim hand on its top rail. A long-held breath. Arthur did not stop him. The legend said any unworthy knight who tried that seat would be destroyed. The boy was not destroyed. He drew the chair out gently. He sat. The painted shield above filled with a small red cross. Lancelot had not moved this entire time. Now he turned very slowly in his own chair and looked at his son for the first time. The boy looked back. They did not smile at each other. Both men understood why. Maybe you have, sometime, met a person you knew was yours and could not say so out loud in a room full of other people. Lancelot did not bow his head. He did not look away. He let the boy see him properly. That was all he could give. Arthur, watching this, did not interfere. He sat down in his own chair again. He said, "Knights of the Round Table, Sir Galahad joins us today. Treat him as such." Then he raised his cup. The room raised theirs. That night Lancelot did not eat at the high table. He sent his apologies. He climbed alone to the highest battlement of Camelot. He stood there for a long time looking at a small distant white stone castle that was not, of course, actually visible. Down in his small spare chamber, Mordred read his long parchment one last time. He decided that the thing he had been waiting for was finally large enough to use. He blew out the candle. He went to bed peacefully. Stay with this. 2 men in the same castle on the same night, both deciding what they are going to do with what they know. One of them is a father. One of them is a snake. The kingdom does not yet know which decision will move it. Tomorrow Galahad will ride out for the Holy Grail. Tonight, all of Camelot is asleep, and the man in deep blue is alone on the wall, deciding, again, that he will not stop loving the woman he loves. We come to one more thing. Galahad rode out alone the next morning. He took no escort. He did not look back. He did not speak to his father about what had happened in the Round Table chamber. There would be time for that later. Or there would not. He rode straight. He did not stop at villages. He did not seem to need to. The road that had taken his father months took him weeks. He was very young. He was also without the wall his father had carried into that chapel. He came to Castle Corbenic on a clear, bright morning. The thin elderly lord met him at the inner courtyard. The old man already knew what the boy had come for. He did not delay. He led him straight to the chapel. At the threshold of the chapel, the lord stopped. He gestured down the long, pale aisle, as he had once gestured for the boy's father. He said only, "Walk as far as you are permitted." Galahad walked. He did not stop at 5 paces. A pale gold halo of soft light gathered slowly around his head. He did not flinch from it. The cup that had stepped away from his father did not step away from him. We pause here. We will leave Galahad in the light. For now. News came back to Camelot before any rider did. Travelers said a young knight in white had been seen at Castle Corbenic. They said he had come out of a chapel changed. They said the cup had been with him. Arthur did not call a feast. He did not call a celebration. He simply nodded to the guard and dismissed him gently. He stood for a long minute alone at the round table. Then he went to find Lancelot. He found him on the wall. Arthur said, "Your son has done it. He has seen the cup." Lancelot did not turn. He said, "I know. I have known for a few weeks." Arthur put a hand on the parapet beside his. "Yes, so have I, in a different way." They stood without saying more. The king did not name the second thing he meant. The knight did not pretend not to understand. The wind on the battlement was low. After a while Arthur said, "Be careful, that is all," and went down. He told her that night what the king had said. Both of them, the way he had said it, the way he had not. She listened from the edge of her bed. She did not answer for a long time. Then she said only, "He has always known." She was right. Arthur had always known, in the way that the kindest people know the worst things, without insisting on the words. They knew now that he knew. That changed nothing about the small future they had. It darkened the air around it. Months passed. Galahad rode the world a while. He healed people. He did small, unexplainable things. Then, one autumn morning at sunrise, he simply did not return from a quiet hilltop where a chapel had once been. The kingdom understood. They did not call it a death. The traveler who brought the news called it a passing on. Lancelot heard it standing alone in the inner courtyard. He nodded once to the messenger. He did not weep. He went directly to the chapel of Camelot and stayed for a long while. That winter was a soft one. The kingdom went on. The court went on. The two of them went on. There were nights. There were quiet days. There were small, ordinary kindnesses among everyone. The peace looked, from the outside, exactly like itself. But you can stay with this for a moment. The kingdoms that look the same as they always did, the months and years before something gives. They are not lying to you. They are real. The thing that ends them comes from a small movement of a single quiet hand. Mordred had been quiet for years. He was about to stop being quiet. He needed 2 things to bring his slow accusation forward. Witnesses willing to enter the queen's chamber, and the king out of Camelot for a single specific night. He had the witnesses by midwinter. 3 discontented knights who had never been close to the king's circle. Each had a small grievance. Each was eager. He told them only the time and the door. He did not tell them the larger plan. He did not need to. He needed Arthur out of the city. He waited, he did not push. The king was an even man. Sooner or later there would be some small matter of state that drew him south for a few days. By the early spring, that matter came. A border lord, an old friend, asked Arthur for a meeting on a small disputed bit of land near the southern coast. 3 days ride down. 3 days back, a reasonable trip. Arthur told the round table he would go in 5 days' time. Mordred listened. He did not smile. 5 days passed normally. The king prepared his small escort. The queen kissed him gently on the morning he rode out, with the whole court watching. In the public way queens do, he smiled at her. He turned his horse south. That evening at supper there was no king at the high table. There had been no king at the high table on many evenings before. Nothing about the room felt different. Lancelot dined further along the same table, polite and bright and quiet, as he always was. 2 days passed. On the third night, late near midnight, Mordred's 3 knights gathered at the end of a long stone corridor on the queen's side of the keep. They wore plain dark cloaches. They carried no torches. They watched the door of Guinevere's chamber from a distance. Lancelot had decided not to go. They had agreed earlier, with the king in the south, with the rumor that always came when the king was away. He had said, "Not this trip. We can be quiet." She had said, "Yes." Then, in the deep middle of the night, she had walked the corridor anyway. She knocked once on his door. He opened it. He saw her face. He understood. He drew her in. He closed the door behind her gently. The 3 watchers at the far end of the corridor saw the door close. They moved. They knocked once. 3 short raps. Hard. Mordred had told them to do it that way. The 3 knights drew their swords on the second silent breath. Inside the chamber, Lancelot heard the rap. He understood that too. He stood up. He told her, "Stay here. Whatever happens. Do not open the door for them." She nodded. He drew the longsword. He went to the door himself. He waited a moment. Then he flung it open and stepped out fast. He killed 2 of them in the corridor in the first 10 seconds. He had been a knight for 30 years. They were the lesser sort, and tired, and not prepared for a man who fought as he fought. The 3rd saw what was happening and ran. He could have caught the 3rd. He chose not to. He turned back. He took her hand. They went together by side stairs down to the stables. He saddled his warhorse himself. He set her in front of him on the saddle. They went out a small side gate the guards there did not, that night, see them at. They rode hard into the night, north. He took the road for his own castle, Joyous Gard. It was the only refuge he could be sure of. The mist closed behind them. By dawn they were across the river. By the next dusk they were at his own gates. Inside, his old castellan met them at the gate. He did not ask. He read both their faces. He said only, "The West Tower chambers are warm. The kitchen has been told." Lancelot put his hand on the man's shoulder. The man turned away without a word. Word reached Camelot the next afternoon. The 3 witnesses were dead except one who had run. The queen was missing. The king's champion had ridden out of a side gate at deep night with her on his saddle. Mordred presented his evidence. Arthur listened. He read the parchment. He looked at the surviving knight, who confirmed every line. He looked at the empty chair where Lancelot would have sat. He looked at the empty chair where Guinevere would have stood as queen. He did not look at Mordred at all. The law was the law. There was no king above the law. Treason was a death by burning. The king did not change the sentence. He did not have a way to. He pronounced it himself, in a voice that sounded like a stranger's. The room was very quiet. Mordred did not smile. He bowed with proper humility. He sat down again. The plan he had carried for 15 years had finally reached its first proper step. Arthur did not look at him. He never quite looked at him again, in fact. A pyre was built in the great courtyard for the next noon. Word was sent north to Joyous Gard by ordinary messenger, naming the place and the hour. The kingdom understood that what came next would not be a small thing. We pause here, with the wood already stacked. The messenger reached Joyous Gard at first light. He was admitted to the inner courtyard. He bowed. He gave the letter to Lancelot in person. He did not stay for an answer. He turned his horse and rode south again. Lancelot read it once. He folded it back. He went up the inner stair to the chamber where Guinevere was. She was at the small narrow window, watching the sun come up over the moat. He gave her the letter. She read it. She did not weep. Tomorrow at noon. He said,
Yes.
She said, he must do this? There is a law. He has to. He said, I know. She said, and you will come for me. He said, yes. That was all. He sent ahead. He sent for every man who had ever sworn fealty to Joyous Gard. He sent to 2 old allies in nearby castles. By the next morning he had 80 knights and 300 men at arms ready to ride south. They rode south at a hard pace. He left the queen behind at Joyous Gard with a small guard. He did not want her near what was coming. He kissed her once at the inner gate. He did not look back as he rode out. At noon the next day, in the wide inner courtyard of Camelot, Guinevere was not there to be burned. The pyre was lit anyway, as a kind of summons. Tall flames rose into a clear early spring sky. The kingdom watched from every window. Word reached the king at mid-afternoon that an army was crossing the river to the north. Small for an invasion, large for a rescue. The shape of the next part became clear. Arthur stood on the inner battlement and watched the smoke from the pyre rise. Lancelot reached Camelot at sunset of the second day. His column did not approach the gates. They stopped on the far side of the Silver River, in a wide field that gave a clear view of the city. He sent a single rider forward under a white banner. The single rider asked for an audience with Arthur. The audience was granted. The rider asked, on Lancelot's behalf, for the queen's life. He said his lord did not want a battle. He said his lord would surrender her honor on his own oath. Arthur listened in silence. Then he refused. He could not. The kingdom had seen the pyre lit. To accept a private oath now would be to undo a public sentence in front of his own people. He told the rider so. He told the rider also, tell your lord I love him still. And tell him to leave my borders by sunset tomorrow. The rider returned across the Silver River at dusk. He told Lancelot. Lancelot listened. He said only, then we wait until morning. Then we ride to the gate. Then we see what they will do. His captains nodded. The camp settled to sleep without fires. At first light, the army crossed the river. They formed at the eastern gate of Camelot. They did not attack. They simply waited there in good order. The gate, after a long quiet hour, opened from the inside. A small band of Camelot's own knights came out. Not the king. The king had ordered no battle. These knights had taken it on themselves. Among them were 2 of Lancelot's own oldest friends, Gawain and Gaheris. Both wore their colors. Both had drawn swords. Gawain was the king's nephew. He was a man Lancelot had loved like a younger brother. He had 2 real younger brothers in this story, Gaheris, and a third whose death is, in some old tellings, the wound that breaks everything. Watch this. Gawain charged anyway. Lancelot could not unmake what came next. The 2 columns closed, steel hit steel. Men fell on both sides. Lancelot fought defensively. He was not trying to kill the men he loved. He was trying not to die at their hands. He killed Gaheris by accident. The blow had not been meant for him. Gaheris had ridden in to shield his brother. Lancelot's blade was already moving. He saw, in that moment, exactly what had happened. He could not stop. Then he stopped. He pulled his warhorse back. He shouted his men back. He raised his sword overhead and ordered a withdrawal. Camelot's small band did not pursue. Gawain, on the field, lifted the body of his brother and looked across the trampled grass at Lancelot. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Lancelot's army withdrew north. They did not return to Joyous Gard at speed. They moved heavily. He had not lost the field. He had lost something else. He rode at the back of his own column. He did not speak to anyone. By the third night, he could not eat. They reached Joyous Gard at dusk on the seventh day. Guinevere met them at the inner gate. She read his face. She did not ask. She put her hand against the side of his face just under the scar, the way she had once before, and let it stay there. He closed his eyes. They went up to the same tower chamber. He sat on the edge of the bed. She knelt down on the cool stone in front of him. She took his mailed hands. She did not let him pull them away. She said, "Lancelot, listen to me." He listened. She said, "What happened on the field today? You did not choose. You did not want it. You also will carry it. That is what comes with a choice you made years ago. I am not sorry I made it with you. I will help you carry it. But you do not get to stop loving anything you have loved." He lifted her up to the bed beside him. They sat together for a long time without speaking. The light from the small torch on the wall faded as the candle burned. Outside the narrow window, a thin moon rose over the green moat. The siege had not yet begun. Camelot's army arrived a week later. Arthur led them himself this time. He camped on the wide field across the green moat from Joyous Gard's tall gray walls. He did not raise his banner above his tent. He did not need to. The garrison knew who was there. The siege began that way. It was not a hot siege. It was a cold one. Days of waiting. Single arrows from one wall, single arrows from the other. Letters between the two camps. Old loves and old quarrels carrying old offers back and forth. Nothing decided. One letter, near the end of the second week, came from a pope on the continent. He wrote to both kings. He said enough. He said, the queen must go back to her husband. He said the knight must give her up and go free. Both signed. They both signed it. Not because either wanted to. Because both were tired. Because the kingdom outside their own pain was watching. Because there is, at a certain point in any long argument, a relief in being told what to do by someone older than yourself. A meeting was set. The queen would be returned at noon 2 days later, on neutral ground halfway between the castle and the camp. Arthur would receive her himself. Lancelot would not enter the king's camp. He would ride away after with safe conduct. He would not return. He brought her himself. On a small gray mare, he walked beside her. The rest of the column stayed at the gate of Joyous Gard. Arthur came up the field from the army side, also on foot, leading his own horse. They met at the small white tent. 3 figures stood at last at the tent, the king, the queen. None of them spoke for a long time. The summer wind moved the canvas walls of the small pavilion. Then Lancelot took Guinevere's hand. He led her 2 steps forward. He laid her hand into Arthur's hand. He bowed deep to both of them. He stepped back. He turned, mounted his warhorse, and rode away across the field. He did not look behind him at any point. The king and the queen went together back down the slope to the army camp, slowly, hand in hand, neither saying anything, together. Lancelot did not return to Joyous Gard. He kept riding. He took only a few of his most loyal men with him. They crossed the eastern coast within 2 weeks. They took ship to a small castle on the continent that had been his mother's family's. He went into a quiet exile. He spent the summer at his mother's small gray castle by a quiet sea. He did not ride out. He did not jest. He read a great deal. He walked the cliffs. He slept badly. He thought often about a small walled garden on a different island that he could no longer enter. She, in Camelot, took up her old place at the high table. She wore her circlet again. She sat beside her husband. She was a queen. She was correct. She did not visit any garden alone for the rest of her time as queen. The peace at Camelot, what was left of it, held. The kingdom believed for a season that the worst was past. The kingdom was wrong. Mordred had been quiet for the season because something else had been growing. He had begun, very carefully, to build a small private power of his own. The men in plain dark gray tabards were not formally a faction. They were a household. By Mordred's right as the king's nephew, they drilled in his courtyard. They ate at his expense. They wore no banner that named them. By autumn, there were 300 of them. Arthur saw them. He had a sense, again, the way good men sometimes do, that something near him was no longer quite straight. He chose not to look at it for one season more. That was the choice that would, in the end, cost him everything. When you have built something with your own hands, and you have already once been required to set fire to part of it for the law's sake, you do not, easily, look down again at another small fire forming under another corner of your work. Stay with that. It is the most human thing in this story. That winter Mordred made his own first small move. He persuaded the king by careful argument to ride south once again, this time on a much longer trip. There was a small revolt brewing across the channel, on the continent, that needed the king's own hand. The argument was sound. Arthur agreed. Arthur left for the continent in early spring. He took most of the Round Table with him. He took most of the army. He left Mordred as regent. He left the queen at Camelot. He looked at neither of them in any way that could be remembered when he rode out the gate that morning. We pause now. We are going to step out of the story for a few minutes, to trace very lightly how this exact scene we are about to live through traveled through 900 years to reach you tonight in your room with the candles low. It came first in clear writing from a 15th century English knight named Sir Thomas Malory. He was in prison when he wrote it. He pulled together the older French stories, the older Welsh stories, his own memory of how knights actually behaved. He gave us the version we still mostly tell. After him, it grew quiet for a few centuries. Then in the 19th century, the English poets and painters fell in love with it again. A Victorian painter painted Guinevere in a tower in green silk. A poet wrote her down again in dignified English verse. The story came back fully into the world. After that came the 20th century. Films, musicals, novels, children's books. Each retelling chose what to keep and what to let go of. Most kept this scene. The king riding south, the queen left behind, the regent who turns. Most kept it because most of us, in some way, recognize it. The story you are about to keep hearing tonight is, in that sense, very old and also very new. It has been told in candle-lit halls and royal courts and prison cells and Victorian studios and modern living rooms with quiet voices like this one. Now back to the kingdom Arthur has just left. Mordred was kind at first. He was a careful regent. He sat at the round table at supper. He nodded to the queen across the high table. He answered petitioners patiently. He did not raise the small silver serpent on his men. He let the kingdom believe nothing had changed. For a month, the kingdom relaxed. Some lords who had not trusted him began to. The household troops in plain dark gray tabards walked the streets calmly. They were polite. They paid for their bread. They smiled at children. By mid-spring, the city was used to seeing them everywhere. Word from the continent came back regularly. Arthur was winning his small, slow war. He was a good war captain when he had to be. The continental revolt was being put down city by city. He wrote to the queen weekly. The letters were polite. The letters were warm. The letters were entirely composed. She read every one of them carefully. She replied to every one. She asked after his health. She asked after the campaign. She asked after the men. She did not ask ever when he was coming home. He did not tell her. The letters were a careful dance between two grown people who had each been hurt. Mordred read those letters too. Not all of them. Enough. He had a small clerk in the messenger stables who copied a few before they went. He learned exactly what shape the marriage was now in. He understood that the king was, slowly, finding his way back to his queen. He decided he had to act before that reconciliation was complete. If the king came home to a healed marriage, the king would be too strong for him. So Mordred chose his own next move. It was a bold one, even for him. He decided he would marry the queen. He claimed, in formal letters to the lords of the kingdom, that the king was dead on the continent. He produced a forged report. He claimed the queen was now a widow. He claimed his own marriage to her was the natural step for the stability of the realm. The lords were uncertain, he pressed. She refused him. She said it as a queen, in front of her women, in her own chamber. She said, "I do not believe my husband is dead. I will not marry his nephew. I will not be moved on this." Mordred bowed. He withdrew. That same night he sent men to take her. She had warned her women. They had warned the chapel guards. By the time Mordred's men reached her chamber that night, she was no longer in it. She had taken refuge in the Tower of London, a small stone keep at the southern edge of her own kingdom, with the thickest walls she could find. She held the small stone tower with a tiny garrison of women and a handful of loyal old soldiers for many weeks. Mordred laid siege. He did not press hard. He needed the queen alive. The kingdom watched. The bishops began openly to write to him in protest. He did not answer the bishops. A bishop, sharper than the rest, sent a fast trusted rider to the continent. The rider crossed in 3 days. The rider reached Arthur at his summer field camp. The rider told him everything. Arthur did not say a word. He stood up. He called his captains. He turned the campaign in a single afternoon. He left 2 trusted captains to finish the continental matter. He took half his army, all of his round table, and made for the Channel. He marched through summer rain. He took ship within the week. He came home. Mordred heard within a week that the king was on the continental coast preparing to sail. He raised his siege of the Tower of London. He pulled all his men back to the south. He prepared for an open war. He sent fast riders to every lord he had previously charmed. He asked them to make their choice. Some lords answered Mordred. More than he had hoped, fewer than he had needed. Some lords answered Arthur. More than Arthur had hoped, also fewer than he had needed. The kingdom split. By midsummer, 2 armies were on the march. They would meet on a wide flat plain, Salisbury Plain, Camlan. A messenger reached Lancelot in his small grey castle by the quiet sea on the continent. 3 days after the armies began their march, the messenger told him about the Tower of London, about Mordred, about Arthur returning, about Camlan coming. Lancelot stood up. He did not sit again that day. He raised what he could in 2 days. 100 men, mostly old loyal companions, a few of his own household. A small group of knights from the continental side who still loved him. He set out for the Channel within the week. He could not, he knew, possibly arrive in time. He went anyway. The armies on the plain prepared themselves the night before. Both sides slept badly. Both sides knew. Both sides were aware that, whatever happened, the dream of Camelot was already over. The kingdom that came out of this day, on either side, would not be the kingdom that had ridden onto it. There was, that night, an attempt at peace. A herald from each side met under a small white banner at the chalk, white standing stone. They talked for an hour. They came back. Both sides nodded slowly. A meeting between the king and Mordred himself was set for first light. Both swore truce. Both swore. At first light, both kings rode forward from their armies, alone, to meet at the chalk, white stone. They had agreed any drawn sword on either field, before they returned, would mean the truce was broken. They had told their men. They had been very clear. They met at the chalk, white standing stone. They dismounted. They did not embrace. They began to talk. The conversation was, by all later accounts, civil. Then a snake came out of the long grass beside the stone. A man on Arthur's side saw it. He drew his sword to kill it. He was a few hundred yards away. Mordred saw the drawn sword from his side of the field. He thought the truce was being broken on him. He did not wait to ask. He drew his own. Arthur saw Mordred's sword come out. He drew Excalibur. The 2 armies behind, on a sudden order from 1,000 throats, charged. The armies hit each other on the open ground. There was no high ground. There was no maneuver. There were only 20,000 men, on a flat plain killing each other, for one long single morning, while 2 figures fought alone in the middle of it, at the foot of a chalk, white stone. Stay with this. The thing breaking, on this plain, is not just a kingdom. It is the idea that a kingdom of this kind could be made at all. The men dying around the standing stone are dying because of, in some way, every small careful refusal to look at every small first thing in this story. By mid-afternoon, the battle was effectively over. There were almost no men still standing on either side. The plain was covered in bodies. Mordred and Arthur were still on their feet at the chalk, white stone. They had been fighting, with breaks, for hours. Both were exhausted. Both were bleeding. Mordred made his last move, a clean hard step in. A spear thrust through Arthur's chest just under the ribs. Arthur did not fall back. He stepped further onto the spear. He brought Excalibur down with both hands across Mordred's bare neck. They both fell. They fell at the foot of the same stone. Mordred died first. He died with no one beside him. Arthur lived a few hours longer. Two of his oldest knights, both half dead themselves, crawled across the trampled plain to him. They lifted him gently. They carried him to a small grass-bordered pool at the edge of the field, near the chalk white stone. They laid him down at the moss-bordered edge of the small pool. They bound the spear wound the best they could. He was very pale. He was very calm. The crimson cloak was folded under his head as a pillow. The gold crown was set carefully on the moss beside him. Arthur said, "Take the sword. Throw it into the water. Tell me what you see." The knight took Excalibur. He went to the water's edge. He could not, the first time, bring himself to throw it. He told the king it was done. The king said, "What did you see?" The knight could not answer. The king said, "Go." The knight went back to the water. He could not the second time bring himself to throw it either. The king said, "Go again." The knight went a third time. This time, he closed his eyes. He swung the blade out into the deep middle of the small pool. He let go. A hand of pale silver light rose out of the still water. It caught the falling blade. It held it for a careful breath. Then both the hand and the blade slipped quietly back beneath the surface. The knight ran back to the king. The king smiled. He said, "Yes. That is what I needed to know." That was all. A small barge came across the still pool at deep dusk. 3 women in dark cloaks and plain veils stood upon it. One of them was the lady who had once raised a small dark-haired boy beneath a different lake. They were very gentle. They lifted the king. They laid him on the barge. Then they pushed off again into the dark. The 2 old knights stood at the moss-bordered edge of the small pool and watched the barge move slowly out toward the middle of the water and then, somehow, simply not arrive at the far side. The pool was small. The barge was not. They could not afterwards explain it. Avalon had taken him. Lancelot's column reached the southern coast of Britain 3 days later. He heard the news at the port. He did not dismount his horse. He turned the column inland and rode hard for Camelot. The kingdom was already in chaos. Lords were carving out their own small territories. The dream was over. He rode for Camelot. He found the city unguarded. The gates were open. The kingdom Mordred had ruled for half a year had collapsed without him. The white walls of the great keep were mostly intact. Most of the people in the city were sheltering quietly. Lancelot's small column was the only ordered force on the road that day. He did not take the throne. There was no one to take it from. He restored what order he could in the city. He sent fast riders to the bishops. He sent a single trusted captain to the Tower of London with one careful sealed letter. The letter was not for any lord. The letter was for the Queen. We are going to step back from the story for a few minutes one last time. Because before the small final scene, it is worth asking, gently, briefly, a question that the story itself keeps quietly asking. Why do we keep telling stories about a love like this? Maybe one answer is this. We do not tell these stories to be told that the love was right. We do not tell them to be told it was wrong. We tell them because the people in them do not fit either of those small words, and we, sometimes, do not either. We tell them because there is a particular kind of failure that the wisest among us still recognize as more honest than some kinds of correctness. a failure that keeps faith with what was real, even when it cannot keep faith with the rules around it. Maybe you have known a love like that, in a smaller way. A friendship you were not supposed to have. A grief you could not name. A place you kept loving even after it stopped loving you back. The story of this knight and this queen is the very large version of a very small private thing many of us carry. That is why these old stories live. Not because we agree with the choices in them. Because we recognize the shape of the carrying. We are not asked by them to forgive, we are asked by them to recognize. Now back to one last small scene. The small folded sealed letter reached the Tower of London at deep dusk that evening. The captain handed it carefully to the head of the Queen's tiny garrison. The garrison head took it into her. He bowed. He set it on the small wooden table by her chair. He withdrew. She did not open it for a long minute. She read it once. She folded it back carefully. She sat for a long time at the small table without moving. Then she set it down. She walked to the small narrow window of her room. She watched the soft pale light fade over the wide gray river. She made a decision she had been quietly making for a year already. The next morning she sent for the head of her garrison. She told him quietly her decision. He nodded. He bowed deep. He did not argue with her. He set the small business of arrangement in motion. By midday she had given her possessions away. By dusk she was on a small horse riding south. To Salisbury, to the convent. Lancelot heard, 3 days later, that she had taken the veil at the small grey convent at Salisbury. He left Camelot that same afternoon. He did not bring any of his own column with him. He rode alone south. He rode by night. He arrived at the gate of the convent at first light on the third day. She came to him in the small cloister courtyard with the square of green grass at its center. She wore the plain black habit. The veil was over her hair. The thin gold circlet was, of course, gone. She did not embrace him. She did not avoid him. She said simply, "Lancelot." He bowed his head. She said, "I asked God to send me away to be of use to other women, and to make my soul small enough to fit through the small door at the end of all this. I think this is the door. I have to take it. I cannot come away with you." He nodded. He said, "Then I think I will do the same. There is a small hermitage I know in the forest near here. An old monk used to live in it. He has been gone a year. I think I will go there. I think I will stay. If you ever need anything sent to you, send. Otherwise, I will be there." She said, "I will pray for you." He said, "And I for you. Every morning." She said, "Goodbye, Lancelot." He said, "Goodbye, Guinevere." That was the last thing they ever said to each other while either of them was alive. He went to the small hermit's cell that very afternoon. He laid down his sword on a small stone shelf inside its single low wooden door. He took off his armor. He put on the rough brown wool robe of the previous monk. He kept his vow. He never wore mail again. He kept his promise to her. Every morning before the dawn, he prayed for her by name. He grew his hair long. He grew a beard. He helped travelers in the woods. Sometimes a young man would come asking for the great Sir Lancelot. The small old hermit would smile gently and say he had not seen any such knight pass through the forest. He lived in the small forest hermitage for many years. She lived in the small grey convent at Salisbury for nearly as long. Every Christmas she sent a small loaf of brown bread baked by her own hand. Every Easter he sent a small carved wooden cross. Otherwise they did not speak. Both grew old, both grew small. She died first, on a quiet morning in early spring, at the small grey convent at Salisbury, in her own narrow bed in a small narrow cell, with 2 of her sister nuns at her side. Word was sent to the small forest hermitage by a single fast rider that same afternoon. He received the message at the threshold of his small stone hut. He nodded to the rider. He thanked him. He gave him a small drink of water and a piece of bread for the road back. Then he went inside. He sat for a long minute on the low wooden stool by the small fire. Then he stood up. He set out for Salisbury that same evening. On foot, he walked the woodland path. He arrived at the small gray convent at first light the next morning. The nuns let him in without a question. They led him to her. He stood quietly in the small narrow cell for a long minute. He kissed her on the brow. He returned to the small hermitage that same week. He helped the nuns with the burial in the convent's small stone cloister. He blessed her grave. He walked back along the same forest path. He went into the small stone hut. He laid down on his low wooden cot. He did not get up again. He died 3 days later. The nuns found him in the small hut on the 4th day, peaceful, the small fire grown cold, the small wooden cross still hanging above the door. They carried him gently back to the small convent. They laid him in a stone bier near her. The kingdom, by now, did not have any kings to remember either. That is the story. The greatest knight in the world, the wisest king, the most beautiful queen. None of them got the small life they thought they were going to have. The blade that could not save what mattered most. That is one shape this story has, when you look back. Lancelot was the world's strongest sword. The thing he loved most could not be saved by any sword. The fire of love that burns the very thing that lit it. That is another shape. The thing that drew Lancelot and Guinevere together was real. It was also, very slowly, the thing that took the kingdom apart. The Grail and the lover. 2 paths that could not be one. Galahad walked one. His father walked the other. Both paths were honored in the old telling. Neither was condemned, each was simply itself. A man can be the best thing his world has ever made. He can also have, inside him, a small careful breaking of one rule that quietly outlives all his good. That, the story says, is what most of us are. A queen can love her husband well, and another man also well. Both can be true. Both can be quiet inside her at the same time. The story does not pretend to solve that. It only sits with it. A king can know what is happening in his own house, and choose for many years not to look at it. Not because he is weak, because the looking would unmake the very thing he has built. Many of us have done that, in smaller ways. Stay with that. Most of the small wrongs in our own lives are not, in the end, large dramatic things. They are small careful refusals to look. The story does not blame Arthur for it. He is the most human person in this whole telling. The Grail itself in this telling is not a reward, it is a measure. It steps away from those who are not ready. It does not punish, it only declines. That is a kinder image than most of what we tell ourselves about goodness. Galahad is not the hero of this story for being pure. He is the small, steady reminder that purity is a real possibility in the world. The story does not require us to be him. It only asks us to know he is real. Mordred is not the villain of this story for being cruel. He is the careful patience that grows in any room that has a door no one wants to open. He waited. The kingdom did not look. He took what waiting always takes. There is also this. The story does not let any of its main characters off the hook. It also does not throw any of them away. It carries each of them quietly into old age. Then it lays each of them down. That is in itself a kind of mercy. Maybe that is what these old stories are most for. Not for verdicts, for company. They sit with us in the parts of our own lives we have not been able to settle. They do not pretend to solve them. They sit, like a friend who knew the same kind of thing. This story has a particular shape that almost no other myth has. It does not punish its lovers. It does not reward them either. It simply makes both of them old. It lets them die quietly, far apart, in small, simple places. There is a kind of grace in that, a grace the wisest old storytellers preferred to triumph. They knew that anything that ends in fanfare leaves no room for the listener. So they ended, instead, with one quiet hand laid in another, 60 years late. The kingdom they had loved together did not survive them. It folded back into ordinary country. The walls of Camelot stayed for a long time, then leaned, then fell. The forest grew over the inner courtyards. People stopped saying its name out loud. The story stayed. The story stayed the way the deepest stories always do. from mouth to mouth, from hearth to hearth, from candle lit hall to printed book to recorded voice in a quiet room at deep night. We are at the very end of that long warm chain. You may not remember most of the names. That is fine. The story does not ask to be remembered name by name. It asks to be carried. In the way you carry the small private knowledge of the love you almost did right. The candles in your room can stay low. We have a few more minutes together. Then a short pause. Then a very small last quiet stretch. Then sleep properly when it comes for you. Before we go, one more small piece about how this story carried itself out into the rest of the world. About what you might be carrying without quite knowing where it came from. The story carried from small Welsh hillside fires to 12th century French courts to a 15th century English prison cell to 19th century London galleries to 20th century films and books to your room tonight. Almost every story you know about a forbidden love takes something quietly from this one. Two people who should not. A friend who must not be hurt. A small private garden the rest of the world cannot enter. Almost every story about a kingdom that fell from the inside takes something from this one too. The careful regent who waited. The trusted friend who turned. The king who almost saw it in time. The single small accident that broke a truce. There are paintings of Guinevere in nearly every great gallery in Europe. Most of them show her in green silk at a tower window. The Victorians decided that was the way to paint her. We have mostly kept that decision. There are sculptures of Lancelot too. Most of them show him kneeling rather than fighting. The artists who carved him understood, somehow, that the kneel was the truer pose. The story agreed. There are children's books with a younger, softer Lancelot, where the love is left mostly out and the dragons stay in. There are operas and stage musicals and films and television shows. Each generation rewrites it slightly. Each generation keeps almost all of it. Modern stories of forbidden love still carry the careful triangle of this one. The third person, who is not a villain. The lover who is also a friend of the husband. The cost that is not anyone's fault. We owe more to it than we usually realize. The English language itself carries small pieces of this story. Knightly, the word, courtly, the phrase, the round table, the image of pulling a sword from a stone. None of these existed before this story shaped them. Every time someone in the modern world says, "The dream of Camelot," they are saying something this story made. The careful image of a place where the strongest people were the kindest. We have not had many such places. We do not stop wanting one. That is the legacy. Quiet, wide, mostly invisible, like good stories, it does not announce itself. It simply lives in the language and the gardens and the bedside books of the people who keep telling it. We are almost done. Let your shoulders soften. The candles can stay low. There is nothing else to follow tonight. The story is over. The kingdom went home. The knight and the queen rest in a small gray cloister. The king sleeps in still water under a thin moon. Another quiet hour is waiting for next time. Different gods, different fires. The same kind of night. Something is waiting. You can almost feel it. Not yet, not tonight. Just sleep. We will be here. When you are ready. There is no need to remember any of it. Only the small careful warmth at the close of an old story. Let the small careful kingdom in your mind go quiet. Let the lake, let the garden, let the cloister. Let your breath slow. Let your shoulders soften. Let the small careful weight of the day go. Sleep well. Sleep deep. The old knights have stood watch over sleeping mortals for 1,000 years. They will keep watch tonight. Good night, you. The story is over. The water is still.